Hi, and very welcome to everybody that's joined us for this exciting AF Wednesday webinar. I'm Louis Clabban, I'm head of AF membership, and the topic of this time is our AF Aginflation Index, which looks at the interim figures for the last 6 months since the end of September last year. I think we all feel that prices of inputs we procure has gone up. What we all want to know today is by how much, or has anything fallen? Knowing the facts is important to everybody. Knowing what you can do with these is crucial to you and your business. Today, I'm excited to say that we're joined by members on all points of the compass to give their reaction to the latest index. And my AF colleagues here are going to share their standout points with you. In our audience, we have members from all over who can share and add questions. So please, I encourage you all to use the chat box and ask questions. So if we just have a look at the map of members that are joining us, you can see we've got quite a spread across the country, which is excellent. And we've had a lot more join up in the last 24 hours. Before we get going with today's webinar, just a bit of a reminder. All of you in the audience are on mute. If you have comments or questions, please use the chat box or raise your hand using the button at the bottom of the screen. We'll take questions as we go through this webinar, but first of all, I'm going to hand you to my colleague, AF Barry Crossan, to explain how the AF Aginflation Index was put together. Over to you, Barry.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Louis. So I just wanted to set the scene by highlighting a few elements of how the Aginflation Index is built up. So we take prices from a basket of over 130 relevant cost items. Each of the items is costed to an agreed consistent standard by the buyers and wider AF team. The change in price of the cost items is recorded and a weighted average applied to each cost item. This allows us to build up and derive a reflective headline inflation number for agriculture. This consistency of approach over time ensures we're able to report an authentic indication of inflation across a number of farming enterprises and agriculture as a whole. Thank you.
Great. So the main focus today is what is the number, the AF Interim Aginflation. So what is the average we've established today?
It should
appear on the screen shortly.
23.86, Louis.
So there we have the interim Aginflation spring number of 23.86%. So it's quite a high number. So to help explain this and talk through this, next, my AF colleagues are going to give their reactions to some of the details behind this. First, Matt Keeley, Head of Crop Inputs. Matt, what are the main trends of this that stand out for you?
Good afternoon, all. I guess there's no surprises with some of it. Start with fertilizer. What we also bear in mind is that the major price increase had already occurred before we began this exercise, and the figure on there is 100%. So, as I say, no surprise on that. I guess a big question going forward is whether we'll see a new season this year with the volatility in natural gas prices. So that's one to keep an eye on. In terms of our chems, 8%. That's kind of in line with inflation. There's a few anomalies. The main one being glyphosate, which will be one close to most of our hearts. And then looking forward, really, 2023 will be interesting with the main formulation plants seeing significant increases in costs of energy and logistics. So it'll be interesting to see what that figure looks like come next year. From a seed perspective, concerns really around autumn plantings with a correlation between the strong futures prices post conflict in Ukraine and the inevitable knock-on effect that will have on cereal seeds. So those are sort of my three takeaways on that. So I don't think there's any surprises there. I mean, for me, really, it's food's too cheap, and as an industry, we must use tools like this to bridge the gap, engage with processors and retailers. So yeah, that's my take on it. Thanks, Louis.
Right, thank you, Matt. And I noticed you're out and about in your truck, so thank you for joining us today and going for sharing your thoughts and insight into that. So, Matt Keeley, wealth of information, and encourage AF members to contact Matt with any queries and questions they have in the area that he covers. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. And next we have Christian Dunham, Head of Livestock Inputs and General. Same for you, Christian. What are your main trends that stand out for you amongst all this?
Afternoon all. So the slide that was up a moment ago, the stuff that stands out, the thing that stands out to me immediately is if we look at the right hand side, so dairy, look at that first, and the percentages. So we know, I think we all know that dairy as an enterprise work to very, very tight margins, profit margins. I think there's some reassurance to be taken. You can see that the cost of inputs to dairy, yes, 21% up. We can also see that the value of what's produced is also up by 19%. So I think the margin for profit hasn't changed dramatically to my mind. I think if a dairy farmer, a livestock farmer is already running at a profit and they're already analysing their spend, I don't think that's the end of the world, because I think it's easy to look at a number and perhaps think this is dire. And we also have to remember that milk prices have gone up. I think milk prices will continue to go up. And I think that when we do an ag inflation review, perhaps in 6 months' time, I think we'll see that already small gap become smaller. At least that's my hope. Yes, feed prices have obviously risen certainly over the last couple of months, but they have over the broader term over the last year as well. But I also think that we can sometimes be blinded by percentage increases. I mean, stuff has gone up, but when you talk about percentages, it doesn't necessarily reflect the cost on farm. Wheat is an example. Recorded prices, feed wheat delivered back in February, admittedly before all this happened in Ukraine, £219 per tonne compared to 2021, £201 per tonne. Yes, there's an increase, but it isn't, the hundreds and hundreds of pounds that we've seen in the last few months. So where I'm getting to, I suppose, is my prediction would be that within the short to mid-term, we will see some easing on prices. And I think that'll be reflected come the next Ag Inflation Index, certainly for the livestock producers. And then going on to the meat producers, I think, again, we'll see that gap between the cost of inputs and the value of what's produced. That margin, that gap will reduce. The value of what's being produced will go up. The price of food and the output you can see from here, it's already started to uptick. My belief is that the value of what's being produced will go up. I guess the question is, will it get to the point where we need it to get to in terms of meeting the cost to actually produce this stuff? Difficult times, interesting times, but I don't think, as Matt said, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody to see that the costs of inputs have gone up.
Yeah, and we are. Thank you for that, Christian. I'm here obviously very conscious that for those joining us today, it's the first time you'll be seeing these graphs, the data, these graphs. All this information will be sent and circulated after this webinar. But thank you for your input there. But let's move on to, importantly, reactions from our AF members. The first, we're going to travel east, north, south and west. But the first point of the compass today is west, where we're going to head across to Andrew Shackle from Penlyn Estate in Wales, farm manager of a really interesting and highly diversified business. In fact, you'll be featured in our next edition of AF Magazine. Andrew, your reaction to these numbers?
Well, yeah, they're quite frightening. Some of the increases in costs, especially fertilizer, and seed costs are obviously going to go out of control, I would have thought, in the autumn. On the wider sort of scale, have you got any information on price rises with eggs or things like that? I didn't see that in there because we're a free range producer as well, and I know that market's under pressure as at this point in time as well, the free range market, especially with the shut in. Have you got any data on that?
No, we don't in that particular sector. I think it's just worth reiterating that the data we're using in the collection of basket is what we would term a average, and there is no such thing as an average AF member would. So we're not specialists in the poultry and egg sector for this particular information.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, we're sort of a varied farm, and yeah, we've got a lot of different businesses on the estate, and thankfully.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's a great point, Andrew, and thank you for that. It's just we take a basket of goods across but it's not specialist sectors within agriculture.
But yeah, we are. Yeah, costs are rocketing. You know, every time you fill the red, the tank up with diesel, possibly fertilizer. Luckily, we bought a lot of ours forward last year, so we'll be protected somewhat from the shocks of this year. But what's going to happen next year? But the price of energy has come down a little bit. If you look at the price of gas per therm, that's come back a little bit recently, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It's nibbling backwards, yeah.
But on the wider sort of scale, we are feeling it. With price increases in our farm shop, our suppliers into that farm shop, they're passing on their costs to us, and how can I say it? I'm going to put it this: you can only pass on this on to the consumer. Otherwise they're not going to buy. It does become too expensive. So there's going to be people have got to get used to paying more for the food. Yes, but how much more? I don't know. Especially with the people are going to have to choose at some point between eating and heating, sort of thing. Especially coming up this autumn.
Yeah. Andrew, have you had any consumer comments?
With the farm shop. Yeah, we do. The people in the area do think we're on the expensive side of things, sort of thing. But obviously, we're not trying to compete with little or oldie in the farm shop on that point. But yeah, if just on a wider thing, the building materials, that's another one. We're on part of the shop is under expansion now, and yeah, when we first priced it up 18 months ago, or just after we wanted to expand it, prices have gone up about 30% on building materials. Yeah,
so they have, yeah, which is reflected in that number of 23. But your building materials got 30%. So yeah, it is high, as you say. Yeah, brilliant, great, Andrew. Thank you so much for that. So now we just let's go east to Tony Bambridge, large potato business. AF member and director. Tony, your reaction, please.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Louis. Well, first of all, I admire Christian Dunham's confidence that the market is going to respond on the output prices, because my first thought really is about cash. As we all know, cash is king in any business, and for many, its availability has limits. And so, when I can look at these numbers and I compare that, compared to 1st of October 2020 to now, for every £100 you now need £150 just to maintain and run your business in the same style, is a massive increase in cash requirement in 18 months. Because the thing that is really important, as Christian was talking about, is actually the margin, and can we maintain the margin? That's got to be the business critical element, as well as the availability of cash. And this bit of work, I think, is really useful to the industry, not just AF members, because it's robust data. It's slightly independent from me as a farm business. It's put out there in a very constructive manner, so therefore it's going to be incredibly useful when we discuss output prices with our customers in order to try and maintain that level of margin that we need to operate as a business and get back that cash to repay those inputs. But that's quite a big ask. We'll be selling stored potatoes out of store at £200 a tonne in a couple of months' time, and to think that they need to be perhaps £300 a tonne next year, I think is going to be a huge ask of the industry to come up with. So I think we're going to have to start thinking about how we can mitigate those costs, be it looking at more renewable energy, more efficient practices in terms of how we cultivate land. Do we change our systems of production? And indeed, as many farmers are suggesting, they're going to change their cropping fundamentally to something that gives them a better chance of a margin. And I've got this background picture of oilseed rape because I noticed that little white prills and little black prills all are extremely valuable at this moment in time. Thank you, Louis.
Thank you, Tony. Great. And just to reiterate, I mean, everyone that's on the webinar today, do use the chat box underneath for queries and questions. My colleagues are collecting them up for the questions that you have, or raise your hands. So please utilise that facility, because there's all about discussion points. So brilliant. So thank you, Tony. We're going to go far north now, all the way up to Scotland, to AF member Will Gray from Ethne Mains Farm Partnership. Unfortunately, he can't be with us today, but he has sent us this comment to share with everybody, and I'll just read this out to you all. On the arable side of things, the forward wheat prices mean that I'm looking at a gross margin of around £1,000 per hectare. But the livestock part of the farm is more concerning. My shepherdess tells me that what we have a lot of on the way is lambs, which I'd normally be very pleased about. But at the moment, they're worth a lot less than the fertiliser we are using on the grass. So the sheep are looking at a gross margin of around £200 per hectare, a much more worrying figure. So our thanks are to Will Gray for those comments, and sorry you couldn't be with us today, but thank you for that. We're going to come south to Yorkshire from Scotland to Roger Hobson, who's an arable and carrot grower, and is actually chairman of the British Carrot Growers Association. So thank you for joining us today, Roger, and your comments, please.
Thank you for inviting me, Louis. It's been a fascinating presentation, but to be honest, just really crystallizing and showing us what we on the ground already knew was happening. I think the key point for me is getting the message out there to the wider world. You know, the customer base is just not really on board with this. I had a significant carrot customer explaining to me yesterday that in his opinion, you know, inflation was 5%, and that was the biggest price rise he could see for this oncoming season. And suffice to say, that's an area of carrots that will now not get planted. It is just getting this message out there, because people don't realise quite how serious it is with the fuel and the fertiliser in particular. The other point I think that is quite true in veg and the way we and produce and the way we operate nowadays is that we're used to forward contracting. We've had 25 years of negligible inflation. So I've been agreeing the carrots we're planting today and have been planting in recent weeks and will be planting next week. I've been agreeing forward contract prices since December. And this is for carrots harvested between this July and the following June 23. And what looked like a sensible deal to do in December was well before the Ukraine war came along, and you know, the oil price and gas price went right through the roof. And those contracts are looking really quite disastrous now. But you know, you do a deal, you sign a contract, but it's very, very serious. So the point I'm making is the whole model maybe needs to be looked at, because how can we forward contract a year and a half in advance when we're getting such amazing shocks with your agflation? So this data is vital, but it's just all backward facing, and we're having to make forward facing decisions. So you know, that's a big problem for me and the rest of my industry.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Roger. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of thought-provoking comments there about forward planning and everything else that comes into the industry and your business particularly. I just again encourage you to add any queries and questions to the chat box. Before we do open up for questions, let's just turn to Richard Davies, dairy farmer and AF member and director So thank you, Richard, for waiting patiently. But over to you to open up for comments. And I appreciate your dairy background as well.
Well, thank you. Looking at the figures, dairy doesn't look as if it's come out too badly compared with some of the sectors, which is fine on the face of it. But as Tony said, it's all about cash flow and having cash flow. So there'll be a few dairy farmers who are having to look at their banks because they might be getting more income, but they'll need more flexibility within their overdrafts to pay for some of the high costs, particularly feed and fertiliser. I think where I'm sort of more worried about sort of post April the 1st, really. So obviously my energy charges went up or doubled effectively on April the 1st. So we're going to be refrigerating milk and milking cows. Certainly we're using a lot more electricity. I was speaking to my silage contractor yesterday and my slurries contractor, who's a different one, and both of them are talking about increasing costs of about 20% through this summer, just on the back of fuel use, and also they're having to pay their staff more, and also repairs, etc., costing a lot more. So on the face of it, everything looks rosy in dairy, but I think the coming 6 months, when we get to the September figures, the analysis is going to be very different and not as positive as it certainly looks now. Milk prices have gone up, but I'm not sure if they're going to be able to keep up with the other costs that we're going to have faced through the summer, Louis.
No, interesting. Very interesting views from your sector, particularly, Richard. Yeah, very interesting indeed. It's just a bit of uncertainty as to where these prices will end up.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely.
Input costs. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. We're going to open up for questions. So just bear with me. I'm going to just dive into the chat box and be fed some of the questions from my colleagues here at AF, which are collecting them for me. So let's just have a look at some of these questions that have come into the chat box. Okay. Just bear with me, everybody. I'll just have a look. So I have one just in no particular order. We had one from Tony. It says we normally purchase fertiliser in May, June. What's the best strategy for this year? And what are forward markets like for fuel? Should we be considering forward purchasing or just keep out of the market? I'll turn to Matt and Christian. I know fuel is not both your areas, but what are your thoughts on those particularly on the fertiliser, Matt?
Typically, yes, Tony, you would buy when the new season starts, which is May, June. As I'm sure you're aware, that season was typically triggered by natural gas prices. So ammonium nitrate is produced using natural gas. Normally, when the weather warms up, natural gas prices are low. Therefore, CF Industries would crank up the plants, and they'd have to move the fertiliser out of the storage. So it's going to be an interesting time. And we need to wait and see whether there is a new season, because at the moment, with the volatility in gas prices, it's still very much an unknown, although it has eased somewhat over the last month or so, and we do anticipate there being a new season. But really, I would be sitting on your hands until May, which isn't far away now, until we know whether there's actually going to be a new season.
I think the takeaway point from that is to stay in contact with you, Matt, in terms of the AF membership base, to just keep dialing into you, talking to you, and understanding your team, and getting the feedback regularly, because things are changing weekly.
Yeah.
And Barry, perhaps you could just jump in on the question around fuel, and should we be considering forward purchasing or just keep out of the market right now?
At this present moment, markets are easing, and it's very difficult to encourage people to take a forward position on much cover when the market is and has got the potential to fall with the right conditions. Obviously, the conflict continues in Ukraine, which is probably the one single biggest factor, as is the gas pipeline. When you're talking about fuel and energy combined, I mean, there's such close parity these days. But certainly you would be being very bold to stick a stake in the ground to buy much very far forward into the future. If things change, we'll update members to the AF Weekly.
And this is sort of a general point, I guess. What do we think? Has ag inflation peaked? What cost saving ideas can we implement or help implement to you as members, and what members are implementing themselves? Just a general discussion. Has everybody got any comments on that? Do we think it's peaked, and what cost saving ideas are we implementing, or are you implementing?
I think I'd just pass a comment on forward fixing. I think forward fixing in terms of risk mitigation is always something to consider, but fortune favours the bold, I suppose. If we'd have fixed it prior to the UK, we'd be in the Ukraine instance, we'd all be in a really good position. Yes, we'd all like to think, say, feed prices are going to ease in the coming months, but no one can say with absolute certainty that is going to happen. So would I say to someone wholeheartedly that fixing any feed cover for the coming winter is the wrong thing to do? No, I wouldn't, because no one can say with absolute that things will ease to a huge extent, or even the extent we would like it to. So my own take on it would be that for forward fixing, take some kind of cover as opposed to perhaps all of it, just to mitigate some of the risks. Because no one has a crystal ball to see exactly what is going to happen. So again, just mitigate some of the risk.
Yeah. And in your world, Matt, would that be concurrent in your world?
Yeah, I mean, the more visibility we can push down the supply chains, the better. And we learned that this autumn with covering off most of the early spring fungicide orders over the Christmas period. I think gone are the days of being able to pick up the phone and expect something tomorrow. We've got to learn that we need to plan better, and that's where as a business we can come in and help members with collating those orders together, pushing back through suppliers right back to manufacturing, where we can take a position very early, and in doing that, you're guaranteeing continuity of supply. You should be getting better value for money. But as an industry, we've had this just-in-time mentality, which needs to change. And I think the events of the last 3 years, COVID, Brexit, the conflict, have accelerated that need. So really, for me, it's about forward planning. To answer your question about booking forward, most definitely. I mean, we are looking at a fertiliser pool going forward. We're potentially looking at seed. We do similar forward planning and purchasing on the crop protection side of things. So absolutely yes, from my perspective.
Yeah, great. Okay. We've had a couple more questions in. So we've had a question of how many members are now looking at renewable PV, wind, etc., or are looking to increase what they have to offset costs. If I can just perhaps just answer that, or what, from my experience from talking to members and formerly running AF Affinity, the subsidiary company of the AF Group, we've had a lot of inquiries around renewable energy. Obviously, the messages out there are to try and save where you can and then look at renewable energy options. And a theme that I would just try and put out there to everybody is, if you are thinking about that, renewables, please come and talk to AF early, because there is a lot of demand for renewables right now. Things are taking longer to go through, planning applications, access to the grid, everything else is taking a bit longer. So the key message is really, if you're thinking about it, talk to AF now, because we need to get in early, because things are taking longer than people are anticipating. There are lots of options out there. There's lots of costs. There's lots of finance options. There's lots of things for people to talk to. So Barry, do you have any other comments on the energy side? Renewable.
Echo what you said there, Louis, in terms of, he's obviously currently very busy in that sector. Taking longer to get installs done, connection agreements made. Obviously, clearly, in terms of anything else you can do in terms of reducing your energy, whether it be as simple as changing to more efficient light bulbs, looking at motors and things like that, it might be the time to invest in having more efficient processes and systems that use less energy. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. And messaging from David Hoyles. Can you put up, or will we be emailed the Aginflation by input class, like animal feed, fuel, labour, seed, etc.? The short answer is yes, David. We will send round further details of this and some, a bit of analysis of it and a explanatory note of it all, so it should all be clearer for you. But absolutely, we'll send that after this webinar. And to all the farmer members, really just a bit of interaction here. What are you doing differently now in these times of high ag inflation? So an opening up to the floor, really. So the question is, to all the farmer members, what are you doing differently now in these times of high ag inflation?
You want me to go first, Louis?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Well, trying to plan a lot better than I normally would do. We were very fortunate. We've had three fortunate buys really in the last 6 months. I ordered my 6 tons of milk powder last October because I knew there were some tariffs coming on January the 1st as we left, formally left the EU. So there was extra tariffs going to be on milk powder. So we bought that early, and that, bearing in mind that everything actually just took off, even including that. I really took a massive decision, I thought, to buy fertiliser just before Christmas at £592 a tonne, which actually looks quite cheap, very cheap now, but it didn't feel it at the time, but sometimes you have to be bold. No. And we did a 12-month contract for food middle of Feb, which was just before Putin decided to cross the border. So but all that was done with, sometimes you have to be a bit bold in business, and sometimes you're lucky, and the food one certainly was lucky, but it's going to have paid off. Yeah, we are going to have to buy a bit more fertiliser to cover our loss this year, and it'll be a higher price, and we're just watching the markets. All you can do is watch the markets and plan. We are looking. We've also had John Wadeson out, or one of the guys, to do surveys on some new buildings we put up last year. So we are looking at putting solar panels in. We were going to put a lot more in, but have been slightly stuck because UK Power wanted 44,000 to put an extra line in to carry more current, which is a bit of a shame in many respects, because it's going to limit what we can produce ourselves and then export. So yeah, we are looking at various options to try and mitigate these things. Within the business itself, we're making sure we don't carry any stock that we don't need to. So anything that's not producing as well as it could, we're just trying to limit the number of those we've got on the farm. So just to keep more of the efficient cows rather than those that are passengers.
Yeah, I was just on that renewables. You just mentioned UK Power Networks. They and all the other kind of big or utilities or companies are all busy. So they're trying to get things through with them. It's just taking a lot of time. So yeah.
To be fair, because I started this just before the big hikes, so it did come through quite well. But it's if you give John a ring, it's very easy service to do. And then a guy, I can't remember from what company, came and did the survey of the building. So we're sort of through the sort of first 40% before we get to making a decision, really. And the payback, I think, on the figures as of the April 1st price increases is about 5 years on the panels, which obviously is a lot shorter than it would have been previous to that. When we first started looking, it was about 12 years. But the price of energy could go down as well; it could go up. So you just have to go in into these projects with your eyes open.
Thank you, Richard. If we could just go, I know Andrew's keen to come in, but can we go to Roger Hobson, please? Yeah, Roger.
Yeah, I don't think there's any magic formula, any panacea. It's just like everybody's saying, it's about attention to detail, isn't it? Stock control, recosting everything, checking everything. I mean, normally fertilizer I always buy by the full truckload because it's the most efficient way of doing haulage. This morning from AF Group, I bought several part loads of fertilizer, just what we need to finish off the remaining carrot planting. That we will not carry more than 2 or 3 bags of any particular type of fertilizer over at the end of this season, which is totally unusual for us.
Great. Thank you, Roger. Yeah. Andrew.
Just the solar panel. Richard, said about the the payback time, we first looked at it just as the pandemic hit, to feed into our farm shop, and the payback time has come down from like 7 years to just under 5 years for that, just purely on the increase in electricity, which is offsetting. And yeah, we don't carry any more stock than needed. We more luck than judgment, maybe. I don't know. We invested in a strip till drill. A no-till drill back in January, as the fuel prices were starting to take off, and obviously the chem prices going up as well, to try and mitigate that, because they seem to be the way to go at the minute. So obviously less fuel and lower horsepower required to do the job.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. So another question in, it says that if today's 6-month ag inflation is 23.86%, what is the 12-month ag inflation figure, please, from March 21 to March 22? Our previous 1 year ag inflation, September 20 to September 21, was 21.79%. It's obviously a number we could calculate and circulate, but just to remind everybody that this one is a 6-month interim ag inflation, just to look at really what's happening in the market currently. We produce our annual one each September, which is a reflection over 12 months. So we don't have currently have the March to March figures that's on there. If you just look at the screen, you can see the kind of rate of curve. Unfortunately, is obviously it is up on the ag inflation compared to the RPI of total food. I'll just give you all a few seconds just to read and have a look through that. So that question was from David Hoyle. So thank you, David, for that question. We haven't given you the exact answer, I know, but I hope that was a useful, just to tell you that the 12 months is, we calculate it from September through to September. Just returning back to that curve, that graph that was on there. Obviously, you did see that the RPI has slightly lifted in terms of its projection, and slightly up. We'll be waiting with bated breath to see if that continues to grow. As someone pointed out earlier, the sort of RPI seems to have gone up. Everyone thinks inflation's gone up by 5 or 6%, but we'll see if the RPI continues to grow. Perhaps a more general question for everybody. Is this ag inflation index that we're producing, is it across, this is an open question to everybody, is it helping you as a way of improving your business planning and management? So I'm opening up to the floor. Please put comments into the box. I can see a few people diving in, but please add your comments in. A couple of people are typing away, but they're just waiting for those to appear in the inbox. Either. Perhaps when I start, just open it up just whilst we're waiting for those to come in. So the question really for Tony Bambridge. Tony, if you the Ag Inflation Index, does it a way of helping improve your business planning and management?
Yeah, I think it is of assistance, but obviously each business has its individual purchases, and so we're all in a slightly different place, aren't we? So I think, as Roger Hobson said, the important thing is to make sure you do your own costings, and that's the important thing. And so that's really what is important. And I think that it's worth just throwing out, of course, this isn't a UK problem we're experiencing. This is a bit of a world problem. It's certainly a problem in the EU. We should remember that if we were in the common market now, we would be possibly advised to play up our stewardship margins and crop them like the Irish have been doing, because they recognise that there is a significant impact on production because of fertiliser costs. I don't want to stray into Richard's territory, but I understand liquid milk is possibly going to be a bit short in the UK and in Europe indeed, because of the reduction in fertiliser. So there's all sorts of pressures that are going on out there. Some are negative and some are positive to us in agriculture. And I think this ag inflation tool that you've done is a first-rate piece of work that will help us with calculating both in our own business what the impact is, but also to share with others what's happening in our industry, and so what needs to happen beyond the farm gate.
Yeah. No, thank you, Tony. Well, interesting. We've just had two comments come into the box saying, this is obviously, one is that it's valuable to share with customers an independent perspective. This is an independent perspective, and it sharpens the mind to the general picture in agriculture and how much the cost of food production is actually climbing. But the big question on everyone's lips is how much customers are going to be prepared to pay for these rises.
I think that's one of the issues we've got, Louis, is how high can some products go until the consumer starts finding alternatives. So I think milk has got a bit of a way to go in some areas, but certainly perhaps more expensive cheeses, etc., from the dairy sector could actually come under pressure a lot sooner. I think milk is going to be short, one, because of fertilise, but B, because there's not the number of cattle there are around. People have culled cows a lot earlier, or quite a few farmers, my neighbour in particular, he sold his cows 2 weeks ago. So that's another 90 cows that aren't in the system. So, there are a lot of farmers taking some big decisions at the moment about their future, or in agriculture, or in particular sectors.
Yeah. This is obviously looking at the ag inflation side of things, but obviously from a consumer perspective and prices and rising and everything else. So you talked about what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives to the consumers?
It depends on the sector, really. But they will often trade down into more sugary products rather than less healthy products.
Yeah.
So it depends on the sector.
So this has a health knock-on effect, doesn't it?
Potentially, yes.
I think we crushed our own oilseed rape and sell it bottled through the shop. And when we did the first lot last September, August, September, when rape was 450, 500 pound a ton, we set the price of the oilseed rape at that in the bottle in the shop at that. What is it now? What is it today? About 850 pound a ton, I think, something like that. Well, we could never double the price of the oilseed rape in that bottle to pass on to the consumer. They just wouldn't buy it. It'd be unsustainable. They wouldn't buy it. It'd just be left on the shelf. So we could pass some of it on, but not all of it.
Yeah, and is it your own bottling plant you have there, Andrew?
No, we sent it away to be crushed and bottled, and
crushed and bottled away. Yeah,
flavored or whatever. Different flavors go in there, and it comes back to us. But we couldn't literally double the price of it. It just wouldn't sell.
No. And the team that you use there to do that, they've been all right with their supply of bottles, for example, and things like that.
No, there's not been an issue with the supply of bottles or anything. No, that's been fine. Yeah, transport is that's another thing which adds to the cost of it as well, because it's and we would transport it to the crush and bring it back on a pallet. That's another cost which has gone up. Obviously, because fuel costs have gone up and labour's gone up. All that's the price point on the bottle.
Yeah. All that sort of cuts into margin. Yeah. And Roger, the UK is used to cheap carrots. Is that true or false?
Yeah, I mean, if they're 45p a kilo when I was in Sainsbury's this morning, according to the NHS, if you eat your 5 a day, a daily portion of carrots is 80 grams. So my rough maths, that is slightly under 4p a portion for your daily portion of carrots. You can have them every day of the month for just over £1. Compare that to the cost of a McDonald's meal or something. You can't get better value than British carrots, can you? Everybody's paying. Perhaps it's potential
I love the
price rise on 4p a day, isn't there?
I love the product placing in this webinar. Yes,
Yeah.
Well done.
You're in the wrong job, Roger. You ought to be in marketing.
It's got in there. Yeah.
If I was, my carrot price would be better.
Needed to say there are other alternatives to carrots. Other outlets. Yes, just to be impartial. That's great. Does anybody have any other queries, comments from the team? So I'm looking at the AF team and the AF members and panelists.
I think, Louis, I think that as an industry, we'll probably move a lot further down the regenerative agriculture approach. I mean, certainly our experimentation with cover crops over the last 2 or 3 years, we can see a saving in diesel of tilling land after cover crops, and so that's a benefit. And I think it was Andrew, he said that he went and bought his direct drill or no-till min-till drill in January. We're slightly behind the Southwest always because that was March before we bought ours, but I think that's something I never thought we'd probably ever bother to look at and purchase, but we have done. So I think agriculture will be as innovative as ever in finding ways to still maintain production levels whilst innovating and moving forward on a journey. That because we'll put some different pressures on procurement because we'll be looking to procure different things. It's certainly going to put a bit more of a sharp focus on glyphosate, so lots of cheap glyphosate. Matt Keeley, that's quite an easy job for you to do, I think, and get that out to us, and because that's going to be a change in how we look to farm. So it's actually quite an opportunity for us in many respects, isn't it, to really look at what we do and consider it in a different way, because when we've just been jogging along how we were in a fairly stable sense, we perhaps rest on our laurels a little bit, and we all know that we've got to change what we do now, and that will bring innovation, I'm sure.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Any other queries or comments from everybody on the what's there? Yeah. Okay, well, it just leaves me to thank everybody for this webinar. My thanks internally to the AF team of Matt, Christian and Barry. Big thank you to obviously Roger, Tony, Andrew, Richard Davis and to member Will Gray, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. All the links, information, details, graphs and everything else will be circulated after this. I hope that today's discussion was useful to everybody. Wednesday webinars, we're doing more of them across the AF group, so please join the next ones that will be circulated again with information of them upcoming. The next webinar will be actually on about the future of crop protection and the routes to successful farm business diversification, which cropped up today. Thank you from me and everybody here and everybody behind the scenes putting this together today. We look forward to seeing you all very soon. And thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you all soon. Many thanks. Take care.